Okay. Hi there, I am Karina Holosko, and I'm the editor of COVID Rebels 2021. And I am here with one of our very talented poets, Gerald Harris. And Gerald was a justice for the New York City Criminal Court, and then went on to be an acting justice for the New York State Supreme Court. And strangely enough, he was also asked to prosecute Lenny Bruce. And if you don't know who Lenny Bruce is, that's okay. Rolling Stone made him after Richard Pryor, George Carlin, so he's big up there. And he was prosecuted for, what was it, obscenity? Gerald?
Well, he was actually prosecuted under a statute, accused him of giving an indecent performance. It was at the Cafe Au Go-Go in the village, in Greenwich Village, back in 1964.
Well, that was from what I read on Wiki, is a landmark case for the freedom of speech in New York City. And you couldn't take the case because you kept laughing at him and you just thought that freedom of speech was more important to preserve. Am I correct?
Yes, and in fact, I often say that my interaction in that case was the proudest moment of my legal career, because they did ask me to prosecute Bruce, and I listened to the tape of his performance, and then we had a hearing before a judge, a preliminary hearing, and I played the tape, and Bruce was in the courtroom looking at me, and our eyes locked, and he could see my struggle. I was biting my lips to prevent myself from bursting into laughter. And I realized right then and there, I cannot be the prosecutor of this person. He is truly a comic genius, and he has a routine that has really socially redeeming value. And I also felt that the statute under which they were suggesting he be prosecuted was vague and unconstitutional. So I asked my bosses to take me off the case, and they did. Somebody else took it over. Bruce was prosecuted and convicted. And while his case was pending on appeal, he sank deeper into depression and drug use and died before the court could ever rule on an appeal. But his co-defendants, the owners of the Cafe Au Go-Go, did perfect an appeal, and that case resulted in a reversal. And ultimately, I believe Bruce was pardoned by one of our recent governors.
In 2003, a posthumous pardon by George Pataki, governor.
Well deserved.
Yes, just a really brief, where did you grow up, Gerald?
I was born and grew up in the South Bronx in a tenement building that was probably built just a few years after the Civil War. Across the street from a park called Crotona Park, where I spent a good part of my youth, and that park really prevented my block from becoming a slum, because instead of another row of tenements facing our building, we had this beautiful open park where we played baseball and football and basketball, and then I would come home and write poetry. For want of a better medium, I would sometimes write it on the wall of our single toilet. And you know, the amazing thing to me was that my mom, who was a pretty good housekeeper, didn't wipe it off. She let it sit there on the wall for days. So anyone who came and used the toilet got to read my poetry.
Oh my God. Gerald, what do you have to read for us today?
Well, I wanted to read a few poems about my beloved borough of the Bronx.
Okay.
And then a couple of poems of protest involving, really, in a sense, the Black Lives Matter movement, and then perhaps, if we have time, a couple of other things. So would you like me to begin?
Yes, please. What is the name of the first one?
Well, the first poem is called South Bronx.
All right, begin.
South Bronx, the apartment, a railroad and a tenement, barely less old than the Civil War. Long, narrow hall leads to windows that overlook backyards overgrown, hosting clotheslines which stretch from sill to leaning poles on which may flap yellowed long johns, rear seats unbuttoned, dangling lascivious arms around baggy underpants, barely pink. Dogs with bristled fur sulk between scratches, growl at short cutting yard crosses, and one-eyed cats. That's
Very
the end of that
nice.
poem.
Okay, and next,
The next is called The Roof, which is a place we spent a lot of time in our neighborhood to avoid people you didn't want to meet, including truant officers. And it's called The Roof.
okay,
The roof was a refuge, a place to get cool, to play hooky, to escape parental stares. It was a summer resort when beaches were beyond reach, a hangout to smoke and to shoot BBs at flies. It was a mountaintop that opened on green parks, diamonds, Indian rocks, and lakes. It was an observation post to spy on the block's awakening, the grocer, the butcher, the candy store beginning their day. It was a proving ground of manhood, daring you to cross the 2-foot crack that yawned between the buildings. A place to vomit cheap wine, peek into unshaded windows at bloomered women and ripening girls. It was an escape from beatings, intruding cops, searching truant officers, and guys with a beef. It was a place to make out, grow up, disappear. It was the top of the world.
wow,
The end.
love it. Keep going. We
Okay,
want more.
I have published a book of poetry called Riding By, collected poems. And the title poem, Riding By, is about the subway that rode past my neighborhood on an elevated track. My father had been a conductor on the 3rd Avenue L for 50 years. And so this poem is as follows. The train screeches.
Oops, we're having a little trouble with the audio. Hold on, we had a little trouble with the audio. Can you, okay, try again.
Okay.
Better.
Riding by. The train screeches as it carries me back, even as it takes me away. High over the street it roars as I lean unseen in its maw. Like some Rip Van Winkle, I stare at the dimly remembered streets and eye the mass below, whose lives I no longer share. Where once I fought and played, hid, cried, loved, and bled, they sit now on milk crates, boy with a do-rag round his head. People in torn tank tops laugh, swig beer, and toss some dice. They hang from open windows, buy pizza by the slice. In faded memory, again I run on littered streets with brothers, jump high and far, swing the bat as hydrants gush in gutters. 3 steps to Germany, kick the can and run until lack of light and hunger signal the games are done. Now in suit, carrying leather case, it may seem to some I've gained, yet to me the bargain's less. Change leaves me oddly pained. Now the train rolls on, lurching along the line. I slump down in my seat, dragged off by train and time.
Wow. Beautiful, beautiful. We have time for another. So if you've got another like that,
Right.
yeah,
Well, I was going to read a poem about Trayvon Martin and his death. Can we pause for a moment?
sure, absolutely.
Um,
Hold on. All right, and we're back.
For Trayvon, whose ground is stood that strips the last remains of unlived days? A swath of unmoated street conjures a castle where there is no retreat beyond the last vestige of human connection to uncivil guardians of perceived threats. The arm that itches to be drawn will be worn as a badge of false courage, urged by libertarian rights to bear the means of unbearable pain.
Wow. Wow. And I do think we have time for the last one you'd like to read.
That was going to be pandemic. Pandemic. While we flee the embrace of friends, recoil from the caress of kin, cower in our closeted homes with windows sealed and shades shuttering the sun, unseen like a vapor from a sickened stream, there are mists among us, a miasma of lethal drops, newly known and more fearsome than the plagues of old, which took their toll without fanfare or fuss. Now we tabulate, project, graph slopes, plot peaks, flatten curves. We forecast tolls, scour for masks, grasp for gowns. While we praise the past, we cannot help but wonder what the future world will be.
Wow. Thank you, Gerald. Thank you. Now, I'd like to ask you about how you found the New York Writers' Room.
Well, I actually was looking for open mics,
Mhm.
places to read my poetry. I've read in the Bronx Museum, I've read in KGB in the Village, I've read in the Tannery in Santa Cruz. But I saw that there was a regular reading at the library sponsored by the union. And I began to go and read my poetry there on a regular basis. And frankly, I simply began to feel like I was taking advantage, if I'm going to be using the union and its facilities, I really ought to be a member of the union. So I joined and paid my dues, and I'm still an active member.
Wow. And so the last thing we want to know for your audience out there, the name of your book.
Yep, my book is
Yes.
Writing By, Collected Poems by Gerald Harris.
Hold it up a little bit. Can you hold it up? Writing By, Collected Poems by Gerald Harris. And where can we buy that book?
Well, it's available at least in, it's a virtual book at the virtual bookworm.
Okay.
It may be available, or it had been available at Amazon and perhaps will be again.
Okay.
And I just want to mention that I'm in the process of, I'm about to have another book published called Black Hole.
Black
And,
Hole?
Black Hole, that's the cosmic
Mhm.
event
Yes, of course.
that gets a lot of attention these days. And I think it's going to have some very interesting and exciting poetry.
And when will that be coming out?
Within months, I expect.
Okay, great. Right after the anthology then. Is there any way that people can get in touch with you if they'd like to ask you stuff or get to know you?
Well, you can by emailing me.
Okay. So what I will do is I put the email in the little description of your bio in the front. And then if people would like to talk to Gerald and ask him stuff, he'd be happy to do so. So I want to thank you very much for being here with us today. And we are very proud that you are part of this anthology, this special
Thank you very
anthology.
much. I
All right.
enjoyed reading.
Thank you,
and
Gerald.
speaking. Good
Bye.
night.